All right, here we go. In theory, anybody watching the recording after this, you can probably skip the first few minutes or so, as I am going to wait until at least a few people show up before I really get started. Let me brush this off my screen there, mute myself, get all this set up. I'm going to try to keep this under 2 hours. As, like I said in the community announcement, I am still pretty sick, so that's why my voice probably sounds off. But I can't wait until I'm not sick. I'm not a politician. I can't just take infinite time off and still get paid for work that I'm not doing. Right. That's all ready. That is set to live. This one is set to live. Okay. uh, Me returning to Alaska would be something awesome to happen in the second half of this decade, but that would require my income returning to levels that are equivalent to what I earned while I was in Alaska. All right. We are going to use Google Earth, but later. So, like I said, I'm waiting a few minutes to give people time to show up and see if Josh shows up as well. In the meantime, for a brief, like, first thing, I used that image that's looks cooler, but it's not actually one of like a realistic lander. This is one of the more likely actual designs, but the Artemis missions are something that's going to continue. Although Artemis 2, where humans, an actual manned capsule will orbit the moon, not land on it, but orbit the moon again for the first time in 50 years. That will be taking place in the second half of 2026. Although, if you look on Google, it still has it listed for the end of this coming year, 2025. But that's going to be in 2026. And the Artemis 3 mission, uh, which will be the first time human beings have actually set foot back on the moon in over 5 decades, or close to six, actually, is still listed as late 2026, early 2027. That's going to be probably 2029. There is also a chance that might get delayed until 2030 itself. But the most likely time frame for that at the moment is 2030, or sorry, 2029, not the late 2026 or early 2027 that it's still listed as. But oh yeah, and in light of that, some actual uh, decent news. Blue Origin's New Glenn actually had its static fire test and everything went well. So New Glenn will be launching, in theory. In theory, it could launch New Year's Eve. If not, it would be delayed until like a week or two into January this coming month. And how long have I been? About 4 minutes. Yeah, I'd say we're getting close enough. All right, I'm gonna drink some water, and then I'm gonna go ahead and get started, regardless of who is or isn't here. 4, 3, whatever. Stop giving me notifications. No Josh yet. Let me see if he responded to my text. No. Okay, he's dead. All right, so, and I apologize for the fact that I'm going to be clearing my throat a lot and probably coughing and sneezing a few times. So, starting off with basic economics. At present, as of now, the end of 2024, this is the top 10 list of economies in the world. And this list is going to change. Various places are going to be changed out over the next 5 years as we go through the second half of this decade. So to start with, India is going to skip over Japan and Germany to take the number 3 spot, and Germany will bump down to number 4, Japan to number 5, as their aging population is starting to drag on them. And for the lower 5, this is not entirely certain, but because of Britain's issues, France is likely going to end up supplanting them in a little bit. So they're going to change out. Italy is going, because of its internal issues and its demographic contraction and its aging population, is going to get dragged down. And likely we will see, actually, sorry, that's wrong. Uh, for Brazil, who's going to be primarily buoyed by mineral, metal, and oil prices, for the Brazil and Mexico placings, this is not certain. But most likely, this is what we're going to end up seeing, something along these lines. Actually, yeah, Brazil will probably still end up remaining under Canada. But so this is, I would say, the most likely shakeup or change up of the top 10 economies. So Italy's going to drop out completely, and Mexico is going to jump in. India is going to jump from the number 5 spot up to the number 3 spot, pushing Germany and Japan down. France is likely going to jump past the UK, or more of the UK is going to inevitably contract back below France, because the UK has constantly deindustrialized itself and gotten rid of everything that it used to do, and now is primarily just reliant on a bunch of financial trash in London. Whereas France is actually still like a country and actually like has things and does things. And Mexico will come up and will push some of the others down. I'm not entirely certain about Canada and Brazil's placement. Brazil might end up higher than Canada, but I think it will likely be Canada above Brazil. However, we will have to see in the end. For hold up, the other, where are the numbers? Man, I should have labeled these. Where are the numbers? The actual, there they are. Okay. So for the actual numbers, oh wait, never mind. Okay, I forgot the graphs have not updated yet, but I'll bring these up anyways. The end year data for 2024 has been released, but the graphs, those of you who've been around watching the channel and everything and have gone through multiple years of this with me now, you guys are obviously aware that the websites that have the GDP graphs do not update these numbers until like June, unfortunately, even though the data usually releases at the very end of the year or at the very start of the next year. So at the end of last year, start of this year, India was up to about 3.6. As of the end of this year, India has come in at 3.9 trillion and is going to keep going upwards at a decent clip. And over the course of the next 5 years, they will jump up through the fours and over 5 trillion. And China has remained stagnant for now 4 years, although you can only see these three, around 18 trillion, a bit above, a bit below. For the end of this year, they came in a bit above 18, whereas last year they were a bit below. They were at 17.8. This year they came in at 18.3, I think. So they've gone stagnant as they're starting to suffer the effects of everybody moving their business out of China because they don't like dealing with China's hyper-authoritarian restrictions that they've been diving headlong into over the last decade or so. And also, they kind of see the writing on the wall and they know what's coming with the whole Taiwan adventure. So everyone's been jumping out of China, and China's population is, horrendously aging. As you are probably aware, where are we? This is still from 2022, but so you have to move these up to, now that we're done with 2024, I have to move these up 2 or 3 bars or up 2 or 3 years. And look at that massive indent contraction at the bottom there. So uh, China is stagnating itself and is going to take a big hit with all the blowback that's going to come from the Taiwan invasion attempt, which is a thing that is going to happen during the second half of this decade. As we've been saying, that it would likely happen in the second half, although the most likely year moved up to next year, 2025, because circumstances changed for them that would make next year the most uh, high chance of success for them to do it. And 2027 would be the latest year that it would still be honestly feasible. If they wait beyond that, then they're just completely inept and stupid. And it will turn from like a 5% chance of success into a negative 20% chance of success. But the Taiwan invasion is going to cause massive repercussions and blowback that is going to, even in a better circumstance, uh, drag their economy downwards from its already stagnating point. Not like a crash and collapse, like it's not going to drop down to like, I don't know, 1 trillion or something. It will probably almost certainly still be above 10 trillion, even during the worst parts. So it will still, even with self-destructive behavior, it will still be sitting up at the number 2 spot for a decent period of time. uh, see some others. Yeah, Mexico. Mexico came in at the end of last year at 1.79 trillion. As of the end of this year, they've come in at 1.85 trillion. So they are going on their way upwards, and obviously during the second half of this decade, they will jump up past 2 trillion and make their way towards 2.5. They probably won't get entirely to 2.5, but they'll close in on it. A few other specific countries to call out. Poland got up to 811 billion last year, at the end of last year. As of the end of this year, they're up to 863, and they're going to jump past 1 trillion over the second half of this decade. And they're going to start beating their way into the upper economies of Europe list. They will soon enough be overtaking Switzerland, who is still riding on the gold hoarding revenue to keep itself elevated. Kazakhstan stands a decent chance of making it almost up to half a trillion over the second half of this decade. They came in at 261 billion at the end of last year. As of the end of this year, they came in at 293 or 94. I can't remember whether it was 93 or 94. But Kazakhstan will get decently close to half a trillion. Vietnam and Malaysia are already closing in on half a trillion, so they're each likely to actually exceed that as soon as next year, anyways. Do we have any other specific ones here or any other specific numbers to call out? Not for GDP, it looks like, unless I hid them in any other specific corners. Let me check chat. Okay. Uh, I mean, Canada is Canada is a diverse economy like the U.S. and most other uh, industrialized countries. So at this point, the primary upward push of their numbers would primarily just be coming from any increasing population, which would obviously result in increased domestic consumer spending, along with as well, increased resource revenues, since they are climbing as a supplier of a number of things, oil, gas, several minerals, but that's also dependent on those particular prices. But they're capped right now, as in like there's not some enormous gargantuan momentum that they're going to suddenly gain because they are an already modern nation. They're not a rising nation that's either like in the second half of rising, like Mexico is, for example, where they're like, two-thirds or three-quarters of the way up, or, a nation that's like in the lower half of rising, like, I don't know, say Colombia. So, in that particular kind of sense, that the any upward momentum will be slower and will be coming from any increasing population, which would mean increased consumer spending in general, along with if there are rising incomes, which I believe Canada has an issue with, then rising incomes would also yield some as well. And although it's not a huge part of their economy, increased resource revenues. But their oil and gas plus mining and mineral revenue is only like 10 to 15% of their GDP, as opposed to like the Gulf nations where it's usually anywhere between like a third to as high as 60% of their GDP in Kuwait's case. And well, since we mentioned the population stuff, let's actually get into that. We'll come back to Google Earth in a moment, but for now, we're going to go over to this special map. So enjoy the wonders of MS Paint with me. If you want to see the individual fertility rate graphs, those are available in the Google Drive folder. We just go down here, go to the Google Drive folder. The link is in the description of any video I posted in the last 6 months. And this is a Drive folder with all kinds of different subfolders that have different types of graphs that I've made across and covering all kinds of different metrics. One of which is actual up-to-date fertility rate or birth rate graphs, because the ones that you'll get if you go and like search Google or something on the front page, you're going to get stuff that stops at 2021 or 2022. They're always like 2 or 3 years behind. I have ones here available that cover stuff derived from vital statistics up to basically the present point. And so you can just click on any country you want, and you can see some here, like Argentina, have had this massive, precipitous dive over the last 10 or 15 years. But those are all there. However, it will be easier for me to arrow through them on here. So the global fertility rate is, as of the end of this year, down to 2.09, which is indeed half a percentage point below replacement rate. And over the next 5 years, you can obviously see it's going to go below 2 globally. By around 2030, we're probably going to be at a global level of between 1.8 and 1.9. A decent chunk of that because of, population percentage composition of the world, a huge contributor of that pull down is going to primarily come from India continuing to go down further below 2 as they end up heading close to probably 1.5 by the end of this decade. Although looking at the way their trajectory is set up, they might end up sort of leveling out around 1.5 or so, but we'll see. Because not everybody keeps like going indefinitely. People, different countries have different areas where they do seem to have a floor where they stop. Like Albania, for example, has stopped and been between 1.3 and 1.5 children per woman for a couple decades now. That seems to be like as low as they're going. So, not everyone does not just keep going infinitely down like South Korea and Singapore and China are doing. But globally, over the next 5 years, global total fertility rate will be going down probably to around maybe a bit above 1.8. And but yeah, you can see others here, and all these you can find in the Google Drive that you can look at any particular points you want. And wait, I should probably show you guys, even now that we're actually able to get decent data from them, whereas in the past, up until the last 10 years or so, or actually rather up until just the last 5 years or so, everything we were getting from like really non-modern, non-connected nations with no real reliable statistics collecting from their governments. Everything that we were getting from them, like, for example, Burkina Faso, that was everything that we were like using to show their rates was completely just algorithmic estimates. However, now, for one of my favorite examples, uh, Somalia. Where's Somalia? Where are you, Somalia? Where'd you go? There we go. So you see that dip. That was during the height of the Civil War and the famine. That previously would not have shown. It all just looked basically flat up around 7. And we did not know really that their fertility rate actually started going down as early as the mid 2000s. We literally, previously, this graph would have shown like them just going like this up here until right around 2017. Then they just like start diving down pretty fast. However, this is what has actually been happening and is obviously a lot more realistic. And the reason why I've been able to make these adjustments and eventually the graphs that you'll find on like, Google front page and stuff will be making these corrections is because now, in Somalia's case in particular, they've consolidated as a country and for several years now have had a like functioning government, and they've been able to actually like go around and collect statistics and get demographic information from their population. And based on the numbers that they found as they've gone around, seeing how many people are where, what age, and obviously inquiring from each like village, town, and minor city, how many children also died during this time frame, because you have to factor those into the fertility rate as well. All that data coming in has shown us that for Somalia's example, this is actually what their transition has looked like. It did not suddenly start in 2017 like it previously showed and only went down to 6. It actually began in the mid 2000s and has made its way down to almost only 5. But sorry for that long off tangent. Everything is on, right? Want to Okay. So here we have this. Actually, let me get you an overhead view first. So this is a quick fertility rate map that I put together for use tonight. The dark red is countries that are sub 1 already. Regular red is countries that are close to one, that are like below 1.4. Orange is countries that are between 1.4 and like 1.8 or 1.9. And then the yellow or the bright or really light orange yellow blend is countries that are just a bit below replacement rate or down to as low as maybe 1.9. Then uh, the lime green countries are ones that are like just barely above replacement rate. They're like between 2.1 and 2.4 or 5 or say. And the regular green countries are ones that are in general between say 2.5 and 3.5 for children per woman rates. The dark green ones are up to the lower fours, and then the dark blue ones are ones whose fertility rates are actually dangerously too high still. So, this map is going to change over the next 5 years, obviously, starting with, or we shall start with, countries that will be continuing downwards and going under one, joining the sub one club. Okay, let me make sure I get the exact same shade I used before. So, countries that will be continuing downwards and over the next 5 years, the second half of this decade, by 2030, will be below one child per woman, include Costa Rica, Colombia, Argentina, Uruguay, uh, Brazil, maybe. They will probably come very close, but I will not color them in as it's a not a true guarantee. Venezuela, almost certainly, because they've gone into a steep dive ever since they collapsed in the later 2010s, and they've stopped like reporting reliable data, but we're still able to get a decent enough grip on it. Other countries that will be going sub one: Belarus, Russia, all three Baltic states, Polska, Czech Republic. Who else is going sub one? Uh, Italy seems to be stopping around 1.2 or just below it. Spain, I will color for dark red because you guys seem to still be going down. You've slowed down the pace at which you are going down, but you are still creeping downwards. So take this. Actually, hold on. Let's put Spain as gray because I don't know if they'll necessarily reach and go below one in the next 5 years, but they will probably come like right within sight of it. And back to this. The UAE is the one Persian Gulf nation that will be going below one in the next 5 years. They're already down to 1.13 because despite people having, a stereotype assumption that, blah, 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 Muslims have high birth rates, uh, no, they respond to the same human stimuli that everyone else does, one of which is money. And when people get really, really rich, even if they're like, even if they're zealous and religious, they still tend to stop having a lot of kids. So that is why the UAE has gone as far down as it has already. They will be continuing downwards and will probably go below one. Other nations that will go below one are the Philippines, which is a surprise to many, probably, as they have been diving. They were staying pretty steady in the twos, fluctuating between two and fluctuating between 2 and 3 for a little bit. But over the last number of years, they've been diving down, and they're now down to around 1.4. Japan will still probably end up below 1, but not that far below it, as they're starting to slow down in their descent. We have anybody else on the list here? Let me make sure I got everybody. All right. Yep, that looks like I got everybody who's going to join the sub 1 list. Any additional comments I have to respond to? No comments, no super chats, nothing. Okay. Countries. And actually, yeah, I'm going to use the gray to represent countries that will come exceptionally close to 1, but will not actually touch it. So countries that will come very close to 1, because Italy is still going down a bit, but they're not really in a like humbling momentum anymore. So let's make this a bit darker. Let's make it darker gray. There we go. So Italy is going to come pretty close to 1. Deutschland, Germany, is going to get pretty close to 1. The UK is going to end up pretty close to 1. Hungary, probably as well. What else? What else do we have here? Oh yeah, Azerbaijan is probably not going to actually go below 1, but they're going to get pretty close to it. They're down to like 1.5 now. Turkey as well is actually below Azerbaijan. They're down to 1.45, I think. So they'll get pretty close, but they're likely not actually going below it. Iran will be coming close. They're down around 1.4, 1.5 at the moment. Kuwait and Qatar will come pretty close to 1 child per woman, but will not actually cross that threshold in the next 5 years at least. Tunisia will come pretty close. Out of the North African countries, they're the lowest right now. They're down to 1.47. Who else do we have here on the list? We have to go back over here, obviously. Ecuador will probably get pretty close. Paraguay will get pretty close. Mexico, I don't know if they will keep going that far, but they will definitely get pretty low into the 1s. Same with Panama. And Peru will probably be going down there with the others or with its neighbors. Bolivia will end up down in like the mid 1s, as will probably Guyana, Suriname, uh, and Honduras. Guatemala is going down decently fast and is already a decent way down, so they're probably going to be going into the red. Haiti will be going sub replacement and sub 2. I'm not sure how far down they'll go. That depends on how long the crisis there continues for. But I'll color them the same as the Dominican Republic for the moment, that bright yellow or a bright orange-yellow hybrid. Dominican Republic will probably creep just down into the upper orange range at like 1.6 or 1.7. Canada is going for the to hit that 1 marker, as Canada's already down to 1.25. The US is pretty consistently steady now around 1.6. There is a chance it will creep down like just enough to cross the threshold into what would be red, but I'm like 50-50 on it. At the rate it is still slightly decreasing, it will probably be around 1.5, whereas like the threshold to cross into red would be like 1.4. So we're going to leave that as ambiguous for the moment. Who else is going to come close to 1, but not actually cross the threshold? We have to go over here for that. Sri Lanka is going to get pretty close to 1, along with Malaysia and Indonesia, as they are following their other Asian neighbors' trends. the last of those there. And Vietnam is probably going to descend down to the lower edge of orange. They might cross into red, but for the moment, I'd say they're going to, over the next 5 years, cross down into the upper or the lower edge of orange. They'll probably come down close to 1.5. India, if they continue going downwards at their current pace, they will likely end up red, or they might end up at the very lower end of orange. For safety, we'll put them as lower orange, since that would be, 1.5, 1.6 ish, or around that area. Now, for countries that actually, I'll check chat more frequently. Anybody? Anybody? Anything? No. Okay. For countries that are above 2 or above replacement rate still, that will be going below 2. Start with South Africa, who will be creeping down into orange territory through the upper ones, a bit more slowly than others, but they will be creeping down that way. Already did or covered Bolivia. Is anybody else over here that I might have missed? No. Okay. So go back over here. Uh, Libya is on their way downwards, and they are just above replacement rate. As of right now, they're at 2.18 children per woman, and they've been decreasing by 0.06 or 0.07 per year. So they will likely end up in the upper orange range, probably something like, I don't know, 1.8 or 1.7. We'll go bright yellow for Syria and Jordan, as they are in the mid twos and will be ending up probably just around 2 or just below 2.1 by the end of the decade. Iraq is actually on that same trajectory, as is Egypt, to the surprise of probably quite a number of people. Algeria will come close. However, we're going to put them as lime green because they will probably end the decade around like 2.2 as of their present rate of descent. But we will see. Uh, Saudi Arabia, let me adjust Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is going to end up in the red zone. They're still higher than a lot of the others. They're still up at 1.8 or so, but they're going to be down in the red just because that's the trend that the rich Persian Gulf nations are going in. Turkmenistan is continuing their descent. They're just barely above 2 right now, and they're going to end up in the orange range in the mid ones over the next 5 years. As will Oman, but they'll probably be a little bit in the upper range of it. Kenya is one of the lowest African nations. They're at 2.7 at the moment, and they will probably not go below 2 by the end of the 2020s, but they will get pretty close. So we're going to switch them to lime green because they'll probably be at like 2.2 or something. Botswana will go down, but they're not decreasing too quickly, so we'll switch them from lime green to bright yellow orange, as they'll probably go like just under 2 down to 1.9. Namibia, similar with Kenya, they're going to go lime green. They'll be pretty close to 2.1. Let's see, do we have anybody else that's above replacement still that will be going below 2? Well, I'll adjust Nepal and Bangladesh as they are still going downwards, and they're probably going to end up, along with India, in the mid ones instead of the upper ones. Oh, yeah. Laos and Cambodia are both at like 2.2 right now. They're going to end up probably just below 2, so they're going to switch from lime green over to bright yellow orange. Looks like, oh yeah, Papua New Guinea. Where are they? Off the top of my head, they're 2.9. Okay, they'll come close, but they'll still probably be up at 2.4 by the end of the decade. So they'll go lime green. And Mongolia actually started descending with some decent speed recently. They will probably be close to 2.1 or 2 by the end of the decade, but not likely to go under it. We'll have to see. Let me wipe my nose. Okay. Countries that are in the actually wait, hold on. Kazakhstan is currently around 2.8. They have resumed going down. They'll be under 2.5 by the end of the decade, as they and the other Central Asian nations have stopped actually holding around 3 and they've been on their way down. Kazakhstan will probably pass under 2.5. Uzbekistan, I believe, is the highest, and they will technically still be in light green. They'll still be above 2.5 by the end of the 2020s. Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. Kyrgyzstan will probably go below 2.5, where actually, yeah, Tajikistan is probably going to end up there as well. Now, countries that are above 3 right now that will be going below 3 over the next 5 years. So they'll be going from dark green into light green. Those countries include Pakistan, who is currently at 3.2 and will probably end this decade down around like 2.6 or 2.7. Mauritania is almost down to 3. Senegal is Senegal's around 4. I don't I don't know if they will make it all the way down to 3 within the next 5 years. Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana and Togo absolutely will. They will be below 3 by 2030. Nigeria will be into the threes, but they will not be down at or under 3. Gabon will go under 3. Tanzania, no, they will get close, but they won't go under it. Zambia and Zimbabwe, yes. Ethiopia, a strong chance of it. Not entirely sure, but that is a pretty strong chance. Along with Uganda and Yemen, probably to the surprise of many people. And I think those are the only ones from that category, other than where's Madagascar? Madagascar is 3.6, 3.7. They will probably just touch 3. So we're going to go ahead and color them that. And there was basically nobody else that's in any of those categories. And for nations that are up decently over 4, that will be going below 4 children per woman. So down to this darker green color here. Those that will actually make it down that far include Burkina Faso, Angola, Mozambique, and Afghanistan. However, these ones, Mali, Niger, Chad, Central African Republic, Big Congo, and Somalia, will be closer to 4, but they will not be at or below 4 within the next 5 years. Okay, so got that out of the way. Don't save. And then from there, we go into the actual populations themselves. So, population changes and dynamics you will see over the next 5 years. Chile's population is peaking almost at this moment. It's actually going to peak a little closer than I initially put it up as doing in this graph, because their fertility rate has crashed so much further, so much more quickly. than anybody, including myself, thought it was going to. So over these next 5 years, you will see Chile's population peak and begin at first gradual descent. Whereas Germany, Deutschland, they will, because of the wider wings of their demographic pyramid hitting the end of life expectancy ages over the next 5 years, you will see Germany's population begin declining gradually again as as even though they continue large immigration amounts, it's still not going to be enough to stop them from tipping over. France's population will be peaking and kind of plateauing for a while over these next 5 years, just short of 70 million. And that plateau will continue beyond these 5 years, but this is just about the upcoming 5 years. Japan's population is currently now down between 123 and 124 million. And at their current pace, which they look to be keeping, they will be going below 120, which would be around here. At the tail end of this decade, they will be passing under 120 million. South Korea will be picking up speed. They're going to have one of the steepest drops in the overall long run. But in terms of their actual numbers for the immediate upcoming 5 years, they will be picking up their pace and they will be going under 50 million by the end of this decade. Anyone else in particular? The US, for the US, you will see the beginning of the US's slowdown in population growth over the next 5 years and the preceding 5 years after these coming ones. It will take about a decade to play out, but the larger portions. This is from 2022, so you'll have to bump each bar up by 2 years. But the widening birth of the U.S. Demographic pyramid is about to start hitting end of life expectancy, and then wider and wider portions of it will keep pushing up into that range. So that will be slowing US population growth down over the next 10 years, but you will see the first half of that slowdown over these coming 5 years. Anybody else specific that we were looking for? Oh, yeah, China will maybe eventually start admitting to their actual numbers, which are not that much lower than what they're reporting, but they do keep, unlike Russia, China tells believable lies. They only fudge the information by a little bit. They don't, say something insanely ridiculous. For Russia's example, constantly insisting that they've only lost 5,600 soldiers in the Ukraine war, or insisting that their fertility rate has not dropped any further and it's remained at exactly 1.41 for the last 4 years. China fudges their information a little bit, uh, just enough to try to hold on to some of their prestige, but not far enough to make it seem insane and delusional. Their population, uh, as of the end of this year, is likely down around 1.403 billion, maybe a little bit above at 1.404. However, they're going to be tipping over into a picked up pace. And over these coming 5 years, the second half of this decade, they will be going under 1.4 and will probably go down to 1.37 billion, maybe below that even, but we will see. Let me see. Any other specific numbers I was looking to show? I do not see any in particular. Oh yeah, the global population, whereas most quotes you'll see for current projections still say it will either be up at 8.58 billion or 8.56 in or some as low as 8.5. In reality, it's going to be around 8.46 or 8.45. As of this moment, it's around 8.082 or 8.083. However, because most agencies don't adjust them that often, most like clocks or population clocks you'll see still say that it's already up at like 8.15 or 8.18. It is not. And yeah, these like they pull up Argentina again, these kind of crashing birth rates should, give you the indication of that. I'm not lying to you in that it is not still like bounding upwards at the paces that those clocks are showing. Oh yeah, most European countries will be peaking or plateauing out in population, as most of them will be hitting the point where the larger portion of or the wider long ago generations of their demographic pyramid will be passing beyond the horizon of average life expectancy. So most countries in Europe that are still mildly increasing and are predominantly doing so via immigration will end up peaking and plateauing and or declining during the second half of this decade. Russia will pass below 140 million and continue downwards. Their actual population is currently, as of the end of this year, around 142, although they would still claim, I think, 146 because they spontaneously decided to just go outlandish with the lies like last year and said that like last year they claimed spontaneously that their population actually went up again by like a million, whereas no, it didn't. You're definitely not the USSR. You've long passed the time of telling like believable lies. And for specific events, since we're here anyways, that will be one. As I've said before, and I've said it the same time frame before, the third and probably final collapse of Russia. We had 1917, we had 1991. Now we will have late 2020s. And as I've said before, when I've talked about it in specific videos, obviously I don't know a specific exact year. Usually, for the sake of when uh, I like have to write one, I usually just stamp down 2029 for some reason. I don't know. I just feel like, yeah, that feels like it probably. Uh, sometimes if I want to put it a bit further, I randomly will put 2032, but I usually go with 2029. I'm not actually saying like that specific year is when that's going to happen. It's going to be a process that will occur, and when the breakaways happen, like I don't know if it will all happen at once, like it did in 1991, and they'll all be recognized at once, or if some will go, and then like a few months later, or maybe 1 or 2 years later, some others will go. But as I've said before, those who will absolutely go, who will be breaking off, are Dagestan, Chechnya, Kalmykia, Bashkiri, and Tatarstan. And now that they've revealed their intention to, Yakutia or Saka, whichever anyone calls it in particular. And there is a fair chance that Russia will end up split down like the Ob River ish line, with like a broader Siberia end up breaking off, but that would probably happen later. As in that would take a bit, and I don't think that would happen like in immediate line with the like smaller breakaways. But those ones I mentioned, those are the ones that will actually like nominate themselves up, and some of which already, even in the present high risk environment of saying such things, have already said that the moment it falls apart, they're out. Like the actual local leaders of a number of these places, like Kalmykia was the most recent one who said that in fall last year, bold, uh, very bold, publicly. Like, and you know, the SVR, which is the modern, or sorry, FSB, which is the modern uh, KGB. I think, yeah, KGB was like all one thing, but now it's split into FSB and SVR. Like the FSB could disappear you for saying that, especially as a public official. But Kalmykia was like the latest one who actually just flat out said that, you know, the moment it falls apart, we're out. So, but those are the only ones that are like really likely to break off. So you'll see a lot of maps that literally just stamp every single oblast as like becoming some independent state for some reason, or others that recreate borders of like the different medieval kingdoms and fiefdoms that made up the Russian Tsardom, like back in the 1400s. That is not what's going to happen. Those five or six, depending on how serious Yakutia is as well, they will break away, like with nigh 99% certainty. The rest will almost certainly stay together, but there is a decent chance for the Siberian split off somewhere later down the line. And since Russia is a decent oil producer, we'll then use that to jump into oil production. Okay. For oil production over here. Oh, wait, no, we don't have to just play around on Google Maps. I forgot, I have projections that I made. I don't think I made all of them. Oil production, oil projections. Yeah, there we go. So, hopefully, you can gauge with your own eyes about the middle line there. Middle line, use the border of this folder as 2025 or so, where we're about to start. So, you can visualize the middle with your eyes. So, U.S. oil production is in the process of peaking. At current, it's holding around 13.6, and it's gonna probably creep up just a bit more in the next like year or two, primarily because of Gulf of Mexico fields that will be coming online. That will be doing like 100,000 barrel per day jumps at a time, and will be counterbalancing the beginning of the shale decline for a little bit. But once we get past like 2026 and start heading into 2027, we're hitting the slope. And will likely, by the end of the 2020s, by the time 2030 starts, the US will likely at least be back down to 12.5, if not below. Can I still go side to side? Oh, no, I forgot. That only works if you have the thing open. I'm dumb. Let me reopen the thing. Go here. Russia. Now, a lot of this depends on timing of various things, like when it all falls apart and uh, whatever new transitional government like recoalesces and allows the outside world's oil majors back in to resuscitate its oil production again, just like what happened in the 90s. So the exact timeline of the like bottom out curve and where it will be and when it will like start climbing back up again, That is uncertain. So don't take like this exact graph as like a literal one for one, number for number, year for year of where things are going to be. But it's going to follow this general pattern as they continue sliding down, continuing to ride their inability to really hold it together on their own. And they will reach some low point, and at whatever points the oil majors that were really maintaining things for them, uh, Exxon, BP, and especially Equinor, the Norwegian one, when they are able to re-enter and recover things, then Russia's oil production further from that will rebound. But that's in the future beyond the time frame of this stream or video. But for the next 5 years, Russia will continue sliding down in oil production where it would not have done so otherwise. And towards 2030, will probably be somewhere around maybe seven-ish, possibly below, but we'll see. What else do we have for the big ones? Why are those numbers off? Oh, that's the demand sheet. We need to look at the production sheet. Okay, we go over here. Qatar, during the second half of this decade, they will reach the end of their ability to keep holding 1.3, and they will start gradually going down. They'll probably only go down to like 1.2, but they will start making their way down. Norway is going to get a bit of a boost in the next few months back up to 2.2, but from there they will then resume declining, and even accounting for other stuff, by the end of the 2020s, they'll probably be back down around 1.8 or 1.7. Namibia will start oil production at the very end of the 2020s. They their first field is slated for, I believe, 2028 or 2029, and will jumpstart them with I think 400,000 barrels per day is what's expected to be the jumpstart from it. Mexico, oil production wise, for the next 5 years, will continue being able to hold a bit under two, around like 1.8. They have just enough new fields coming online in the Gulf and some enhanced recovery projects, just enough to where it will continue counterbalancing the otherwise background declines everywhere else. But so for the next 5 years, they should stick around the same general area they're currently at. Libya, over the next 5 years, will continue restoring their prior production capabilities unless they break out into full civil war again. But if they avoid that, then they're going at a decent pace. They've been recovering about 100,000 barrels per day per year. So by the end of the 2020s, they should be back up to around 2 million barrels per day. But we'll have to see, obviously. Kuwait, should the production cuts from OPEC end, they would go back up to their plateau of 3. However, Saudi Arabia is the one who controls OPEC, obviously, and Saudi Arabia is going to keep infinitely extending the production cuts, as you guys have seen them doing for, we're at what, 2.5, 3 years now, because Saudi Arabia needs those cuts as a legitimate excuse as to why they are not returning to their former levels, or why they don't oversurge their production at any particular supply deficit points in the future when the world asks them to. So if the production cuts officially end, Kuwait will go back up to 3. But if Saudi Arabia keeps extending the orders forever, then Kuwait's going to stay down here around 2.5, where Saudi Arabia wants them. Kazakhstan has stuff slated for the next few years that should bring them up to, by the end of the 2020s, around 2.5 million barrels per day or so. We'll see if any delays come to that, or if some stuff comes sooner than expected. Iraq, over the next 5 years, once they once they decide fully that they're done with the OPEC stuff, because they're already done, sort of, in a way that they've been trolling. They're supposed to be down at 3.8 million barrels per day, but they've been staying up in the low fours instead, and they keep like lowering their production down towards four and pretending that they're now following the orders, but then they'll suddenly jump it back up to 4.3 or 4.4 again. So if they finally decide, which they likely will, that they're completely done, even like rolling along with the orders, and also with the completion of various field capacity expansions that are currently underway and expected to be done in 2027. They should be bumping up during the second half of this decade into the mid fives, possibly upper fives, but we'll see for specifics when that happens. Iran, if nothing further continues, no further conflict with Israel, no bombing of their oil and gas infrastructure, and if the country does not buckle under itself, which it is going to, it's already in the process of doing that, then it would go back up to 3.8 and hold there for a little bit. However, this is likely not happening because, like I said, it's already falling apart, and that is one thing on the list of events that will be happening is Iran, whether further aided by additional like Israeli air campaigns against it or any other form of conflict, uh, Iran will be buckling during the next 5 years, as they've already been pushing their civilian population too far to begin with. And now, as they're desperate to maintain their oil production levels, they've been constantly diverting more and more of their domestic gas supply towards reinjection to keep those fields pressurized. And as a consequence of that, leaving less for domestic use, which has caused consistent heating issues and people freezing to death in winter, and now it's starting to cause blackouts and power scheduling because there's not enough gas for all the power plants. So they're now at the point where like this region or these cities get electricity on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. These cities over here get electricity on Tuesday, Thursday, and on the weekend. So yeah, that's starting to also cause people's irritation to boil over and is not exactly going to be getting any better. Guyana will continue jumping upwards over the next 5 years. And by the end of the 2020s, they will be up around 1.6, maybe even 1.7 or 1.8 million barrels per day, as they are looking based on what has been found and what is already slated and on schedule. They're looking like they're going to be going decently high, well beyond what was initially expected of them. Colombia will be continuing their stair-stepping decline downwards, and they'll probably be down towards like 600 or 500,000 by the end of the decade. China will be reaching the limits of what their moderate offshore fields they've been tapping into can recover them, and their ongoing elsewhere declines will begin weighing that down. Probably within the next 2 years, maybe three, if it were not for the upcoming Taiwan invasion, which is among the events and conflicts that will be happening over the next 5 years. I don't know to what degree their oil and gas industry will suffer from the various blowback that will come as a result of that misadventure, but it will almost certainly result in some degree of effect. But in a otherwise normal world, this is what they would look like, their production projection would look like, hitting a final peak in the next 5 years and then beginning to slope downwards. Canada has reached 5 million barrels per day as of the end of this year, and over the next 5 years, they will continue incrementally boosting themselves up with further tar sands expansions. However, conventional declines elsewhere, and beginning limitations on the surface portions will start to cap them off, and they'll be around the mid, possibly creeping into the upper fives by the end of the decade, and that's about where they're going to level off. Brazil is now at 4 million barrels per day, and over the next 5 years, they should be getting up into the upper fours, up above 4.5, heading towards 5, but not necessarily, at least not maybe, reaching it before the end of the 2020s. But they will be making their way up there and should be in the upper fours by the time we hit the end of this decade. Azerbaijan will just be continuing their decline. They're small and inconsequential at this point, anyways. Argentina will be up to over 1 million barrels per day before we even hit the end of the 2020s or the end of the second half, as the Vaca Muerta shale continues its expansion, and it'll end up capping them in the 2030s. But for the second half of this decade, they'll be going up to an over 1. Algeria will end up truly below 1 by the end of the 2020s. And by that, I mean, regardless of any OPEC orders that they may or may not still follow, their actual full production capability will end up below 1 as they continue field depletion and declines all around. Let's see where. Right, that was Russia. Saudi Arabia will basically, unless they decide to go lower before hitting the 2030s, they will probably basically just keep holding their 9 million barrel per day flat for the moment. There might be divots or bumps or up and downs when they decide to do random things, maybe at any particular time. But they made it kind of clear that they're sticking with this now, with their 10% reduced plateau, and are using the OPEC production cut mandate as a legitimacy cover as for why they're doing it. Senegal will continue climbing into relevancy, and they should probably make it up to 400,000, maybe 500,000 over the next 5 years. Somalia won't be starting production until we hit 2030. Suriname will be starting production towards the end of this decade, and they will be jumping up to about 250,000. The UAE has indicated that they're done playing around, and they are going to be going up to a plateau of 4, which will take, I think they said, 2 years to actually go all the way up to that. So that would be like end of 2020, precise, sometime in 2027. I keep forgetting 2025 is also a year that exists. And they'll be able to hold a plateau of 4 up until around like 2040 or so, whereas a plateau of 3 they would have been able to hold until the like later 2040s. But for the next 5 years, since that's the subject matter, they'll be going up to a 4 million barrel per day plateau. US, I think, was the last one. Yeah, okay. Unless I had anybody else on the docket over here. No. However, we will now jump into oil demand trends. Let me check on you guys. Yes, we will. At this exact moment, we're just about equal, equidistance from them. And I was born in the previous millennium, 1993. I did get to see the 90s and the 2000s, the peak prosperity era, humanity's highest point in terms of overall that it was able to reach in aspirational availability of quality of life. Now we've tipped past that point. Yeah. All right, for demand levels, the US here is here. Since I'm going to be on Google Earth for the next number of minutes, I'll increase the size of the mouse pointer for you guys. 7 should be enough, right? And as the population slowdown begins, and because of the price increases, people are pushed towards more fuel efficient cars again, or once again, like they were in the late 2000s and early 2010s. The oil demand levels for the US will probably, as we go through the second half of this decade, will probably hit a point where they will begin to gradually creep downwards by a little bit. They might, we might end the 2020s with the US actually down to averaging 19 instead of 20. In terms of everybody else, Japan will continue their downward slope, having once been up at 6 million barrels per day of demand. They will begin uh, sort of leveling out from their steeper slope, at least, as they get closer to 3, like between 3 and 3.5. They'll probably, over the next 5 years, be seeming to level out closer to 3, and they'll still be going downwards over time as their population decreases, but that slope will be much more gradual than the one that they've been on for the last 3 decades. That has been the result of rapid rise in fuel efficiency, the mass adoption or the adoption of broad mass public transit, and the aging of their population, which is where the broader portion of dropping oil demand that's population related initially comes from. India will continue going upwards, and they will climb from around 5.6 or 5.7 right now up to around 6.5 or between 6.5 and 6.7 million barrels per day of demand by the end of the 2020s. Indonesia is currently averaging just above 2, and they will probably make their way up into the upper 2s, not necessarily getting to 3 over the next 5 years, but they'll be going above 2.5 as their overall average. Let's see if I can read these. Okay. Vietnam will continue climbing upwards, but they just finished new large metro lines in some cities like Ho Chi Minh City, especially where huge chunks of their population live. So they're not going to be climbing in fuel use uh, by the degrees that other countries did in the past. They're around 600,000 barrels per day now, and they will probably go up to about 800,000 by the end of the decade, but they're not going to do much more than that. Thailand is around 1.2, and that's lower than they were pre-COVID, and they're probably going to stay plateaued around here for the next 5 years. They might even creep down a little bit. China will climb a bit more from 17 up to 18, maybe getting a bit over 18 to between 18 and 19. However, uh, the whole Taiwan adventure, which this coming year, 2025, is the most likely year for it, or would be the most, it would be the best choice of potential years for them to do it if they're intelligent about it. Whereas, like I said, 2027 would be the last viable year to try it. If they do it beyond that, then they're completely and utterly stupid. Trying this, and the whole economic blowback from that will see not just their GDP, but obviously also their oil demand take a substantial hit and drop back down below like 15 or 14 million barrels per day to some uncertain number that would probably still be above 10. Let's see. Who else of consequence is on here, at least of serious numbers? Germany, Deutschland will continue downwards below, going below 2, down towards like 1.9 or 1.8 over the next 5 years. Poland will be getting up to close to 1 million barrels per day, but because of their population decline, there's a decent chance they won't actually hit it as an average. Like they might on individual months spike up to or above 1 million barrels per day for some unspecified amount of time. But as their overall average, they'll probably come right up to it and get like right beneath it, but not really go over, actually cross the threshold over into it. Egypt will be going up over 1 million barrels per day of oil demand. Turkey will be going into the upper ones, getting up over 1.5. Iraq will also be going up over 1 million as their domestic average. The UAE should finally stop climbing. They might level off at like 1.3 million barrels per day for their domestic oil consumption. Iran, usually a bit below 2. As they continue internally buckling, will probably have a drop down to going back to something closer to like 1. Uh, as consequence, Brazil probably not really doing much. Uh, Mexico will probably creep back up a little bit from 1.6 back up to something like 1.8 maybe. Uh, but they're kind of stalled out. Canada is going to keep hanging out around 2.5 and actually might start creeping downwards and over, starting into a descent a little bit. And South Korea, who is currently around 2.8, should, as their demographic pyramid is edging upwards into Japan and like Singapore territory, they should start tipping down into a descent. And over the next 5 years, we'll start creeping back downwards into the like 2.5, 2.6 area, maybe possibly even 2.4, but I can't say for certain. Algeria will go up above 500,000 barrels per day for domestic consumption. So will Kazakhstan. Other European nations, France will go below 1.5. The UK will probably creep down from 1.5 down to like 1.4, maybe between 1.3 and 1.4. And Spain and Italy will probably creep down a bit further to like 1.2, maybe just a bit below that, but not like too severely far down. And I think that is it for everything noteworthy oil demand wise. All right, so we've done fertility rates, populations, oil production, oil demand, uh, economy or broad economy. What other trend lines do we need to go through? Oh, yeah, natural gas and electricity. Huh. Anything from anybody? Hello. How many are we? 13, 18? Ugh. Okay. So for electricity, then, these are additional graphs you can find in the Google Drive that I explained at the very start of the stream. So for electricity demand levels, India is up to being on average around like 210 or 220 gigawatts, and they are growing fast as they, bring electricity to the majority of their population, and as they continue rapidly industrializing. Over the next 5 years, they will surge up to and exceed an average of 300 gigawatts of demand. Indonesia is up at about 40, and they, over the next 5 years or so, will probably reach right around 50. Vietnam will come close, but will probably not actually hit 50. They'll probably be up at like 47 or 48 by the end of the second half of this decade. Turkey is not going up as fast. They'll probably be up around like 45 over the next 5 years. Malaysia looks to be, they were looking to be curving over into like a plateau or peak, right? Yeah, they'll probably be curving out and over like a bit below 25. We'll see that start to play out over over these next 5 years or so. Spain, Spain, Italy, and the UK are all around or just above 30 gigawatts of average demand load. They will probably creep just a bit below it over the next 5 years, like down more to around 29 or 28 on average. Uh, China, barring the whole Taiwan adventure thing, in a normal scenario, China would probably end up beginning to curve out or beginning to peak off around 1.5 terawatts or 1.6. And they would be approaching that, and you would see their electricity demand growth start to slow down over these next 5 years. They would not actually reach that peak of probably 1.5 or 1.6 until the early 2030s. However, because of the economic contraction and blowback from that will be resulting from attempting to invade Taiwan, then their electricity demand is going to stall with their economy stalling and probably take a decent hit from that. The U.S. will has been pretty steady at about 500, but will be creeping up a bit higher over the next 5 years. Probably not like that much, but probably up to like 520 or so. Uh, who else was? Oh yeah, Egypt. Egypt will be making it up to just about 30 gigawatts of electricity demand load on average over the course of the second half of this decade or by the end of the second half of this decade. Mexico should be just making it up towards 50, but coming short of it, probably around like 47 or 48. The same area as Vietnam, basically. Japan, for electricity demand load, they will continue downwards, and you will see them transition into staying entirely under 100 gigawatts of demand load over the next 5 years, as in even their higher demand portions of the year will still not go back above 100 as they continue going down that way. So you got India, Indonesia, Japan, US, China. Let's see. I think that's mostly everything for consequential electricity consumers. Oh, other than South Korea is already starting to level out here in their electricity demand. Over the next 5 years, they will start to tip over into a gradual decline. Natural gas production. So, one of the most immediate things that's coming is Qatar is expanding their production from the Pars gas field, which is a gargantuan natural gas reservoir under the seabed of the Persian Gulf, as big as Qatar, the country itself. So, Qatar is currently producing about between 21 and 23 billion cubic feet per day from that. And guaranteed, even if there are delays, guaranteed over these next 5 years, they will be bumping up to about 27 billion cubic feet per day. And there is a chance that by 2030, they will complete the third expansion and be up at a flat 30 billion cubic feet per day of natural gas production. However, if there are any delays to that third phase, then it will be pressed over into the 2030s. So that yeah, the certainty is they will be going from 21, 22, sometimes 23, up to 27, sometimes 28. Iraq is currently producing about 4 billion cubic feet per day, and that is from accompanying gas from their oil fields, and they're flaring the rest of it. They are constructing the actual gas capture infrastructure on their remaining fields to actually capture and produce that third of gas that they're flaring. And that stuff will be complete in 2027. So over the next 5 years, Iraq will go from 4 up to 6 billion cubic feet per day of gas production. Algeria is undergoing onward expansions, and over the next 5 years, over the second half of this decade, they will go from about 10 or 10 and a half up to probably between 14 and 15 billion cubic feet per day. Norway is currently around 12 or 13, and they have a bit more that they can stretch upward, and they will probably be able to like creep their way to 14 or 15 over the next 5 years, but they won't really be able to push too far beyond that. Canada, mostly coming from accompanying gas, they will get into like staying solidly above 20, and they'll be like in the lower 20s for their natural gas production. The US, I believe I have actually, yeah, I have most of these. Click, please. Thank you. Oh no, that's past stuff from that one website. Where's the? It's in streams, right? Yeah. U.S. natural gas production will look something like this. It's already been on a gradual plateaued decline, hit its peak and plateau in the mid 110s, where it still is now, and it will be going down gradually and will go back over the second half of this decade under 110 billion cubic feet per day, probably getting close back down to 100, but not actually passing back below 100 billion cubic feet per day on average just yet. It will be doing that, as you can see, in 2030 or 2031. But over the next 5 years, it will be continuing its gradually increasing downward slope in gas production. As of now, it's gone down from being usually around 115 over the last 2 years down to usually being around 113 with occasional spikes up to 116 or 17. Like there was one of those a few weeks back before it came back down to normal. uh, Australia should be able to continue holding itself around 16 or so. And if it goes forward with the additional expansions that it has planned, it could get up to and over 20. But we have to wait and see if the Australian government approves that. Malaysia, over the next 5 years, will be getting up to and over 10 billion cubic feet per day. China will get close to 30. They'll go into the upper 20s again before this happens. However, then things will get complicated, to say the very least. Those are the general trends, at least, that will be ongoing. And I don't have these on graphs, but also on the side here, I wrote in, you will see global CO2 emissions will peak or during the second half of this decade. Uh, partially partially just from the general trend of things, also partially from, a number of different economic blowbacks and contractions and collapses. Those will have their part to play in it too. But CO2 emissions will be peaking during the second half of this decade, and you'll start to actually see those going definitively downward. Over here in the US, a few years later than initially expected, but you will be seeing the actual like danger points getting reached in the like danger zone low levels of Lake Mead and Lake Powell out here in the west. So that is going to cause issues, especially for cities dependent on them, like Las Vegas, and regions like Southern California that are dependent on getting that water that they release into the Colorado River piped over to them, because California is a water parasite. The state's even shaped like a leech. Like, I do genuinely apologize to those of you from California, but come on, the state is literally shaped like a leech. It even has jagged, like the toothy part right here where it borders Arizona. So that's going to be an issue, and it's going to cause, like suddenly skyrocketing water bill prices that are going to drive decent numbers of people away from the Southwest. And also in 2026, the Colorado River compact or contract thing that was signed in the 20s to last 100 years expires and has to be renewed. And I really doubt that the states, over here are just going to agree to the same terms to let, California continue sucking out as much water as was like given to them under the original. So you're starting in 2026, you will see it begin to get mentioned in the news. And then once it actually expires, once the new negotiations have to take place, that will be a new round of news cycle drama that you will start seeing, because everyone's going to get pretty fired up over that. Let's see. Other water issues. This is not a definitive, you will see this. This is you probably will see this just based on the way they're hinting at going. Egypt probably will bomb that dam in Ethiopia, as they they've hinted at it constantly that they just don't want it. They just don't want the risk of Ethiopia being able to just cut off their entire water supply, because, as you know, a desert nation, the Nile is literally Egypt's only supply of water. That's it. It's not like they have other sources. It's not like in India's case where China is holding back a lot of stuff and diverting a lot of water, but India still has other rivers and other sources like groundwater and such. Granted, that's going to be depleted in the 2040s and cause horrendous agricultural failure, but that's a story for another time. But India, can keep letting China slide while building up its military strength for the time being. Egypt, doesn't really have that luxury, even though Ethiopia, at least as of the moment, is not holding back water from Egypt and from Sudan. But Egypt just doesn't want the risk to be there. So likely Egypt is going to bomb that dam. And if Ethiopia, tries to stop that, there's going to be a brief fight, mostly with air power. And Egypt would literally just crush Ethiopia, like without that much real effort. And in the event of Ethiopia's very almost non existent air power being taken out, then the various uprisings will seize their opportunity to jump into full swing, and the country will descend into a decent amount of chaos. Also, there's a decent chance we will see the fall of North Mali, at least, and potentially the fall of Niger, as they have kicked out France, who was the previous one that they asked to come and, you know, take care of the Islamic insurgencies for them. And then they had to hold them off themselves, and they're not capable of it. They constantly get ratioed in those fights. And so they invited oh so militarily competent Russia to come help them. And Russia has been about as competent as it is everywhere else and has not really, it hasn't worked out. They're not really pushing them back at all. So, also, as Russia is now uh, entering the consideration stage of pulling their guys, officially they're private contractors, but they answer to the Russian government anyways. Uh, the moment Russia, pulls those guys out, Niger and Mali are on their own, and it will go as well for them as it did, in the early 2010s when Mali in particular was like on the verge of falling completely and actually had to ask France to come do a emergency rapid deployment intervention. So the only one who might step in to intervene for them at this point would then, with Russia basically out of the picture, they've snubbed France away, so France isn't going to be in the mood to do it. Turkey might, because they might want to be in like a muscle flexing mood and do something far away to show like their power projection capabilities. So Turkey might come in and try to step up to help them. But, at the same time, 50-50, they might not. So there's a fair enough chance that we're going to see the fall of at least North Mali and probably another version of the fall of Niger. So we're going to end up seeing those come about. Let's see. What else do we have on this decently lengthed list? Was there anything else on the front page that I missed? Let's see. Got all that. We got all that. Data, data. I don't see anything exactly in particular. Price wise, for prices of things, you're going to see. That's not what I clicked on. Excuse me. Click on what I tell you to click on. Price wise, you are going to see silver break previous records. Previously, it got up towards $50 an ounce at one point. It's going to end up going towards 100, probably like 70 or 80 at some point during the later half of this decade, as the market comes to grips with the actual physical deficit and the fact that silver output from various mines across the world is declining and silver demand is rapidly ballooning primarily because of solar panels at the current moment. So that's going to be a thing. Gold around 2,600 per ounce right now. Gold you'll probably see flare up into the 3,000s, maybe like multiple times up towards. Throw a random number out there. 3,823. Let's throw that out there for no reason. That will be because of jump scares, like the China-Taiwan invasion, any further like Middle East implosion chaos, worries about what's going to come about from a Russian collapse. So gold is not like under any heavy supply constrictions. That's gold is primarily a financial thing. That's primarily about panics and geopolitical jump scares. The platinum group metals have a much more tangible reason as to why you'll be seeing those go up. So platinum has platinum is way too low at the moment. It actually should be up around like 1200 or 1300 per ounce, as supply is declining while demand is actually still going up, which which people don't think it would be. Got up to 2000 an ounce at one point back during the financial crisis. But, as populations are peaking and some countries are trying to force feed everybody electric cars, you would think that platinum, which its major demand source is in catalytic converters for ground liquid fuel vehicles, you would think platinum demand would be going down, but that's not the case because the European countries, along with China and a number of others, Japan, South Korea, and the like, have implemented stricter vehicle emission standards, which require stronger catalytic converters, which require 7 grams of platinum group metals, platinum, palladium, rhodium, instead of the traditional 3 or 4 grams. So that has been sending platinum group metal demand up. And this whole, I'm making air quotes, you can't see it because I'm not a webcam streamer. This whole hydrogen economy scam is starting to drive it up because the various different electrolyzers that they use to make the hydrogen require platinum group metals. Despite people thinking there's this one design that doesn't require them, it actually does require them. It just requires less than the other designs. And it's more electricity demandy or energy intensive than the others. So everyone trying to like throw themselves from the rooftops into the whole hydrogen economy idea is also starting to spike up platinum group metal demand, while supply is facing issues. From the South African angle, it's because everything in South Africa is falling apart. Their power grid is crumbling into dilapidation. They have delays everywhere because their railway network is breaking down. So that's causing mining issues. And Russia has already been experiencing declines in its various mining outputs since it can no longer get a hold of Komatsu mining vehicles and equipment, which is the primary supplier they usually go with. Kazakhstan has been able to smuggle them some, but not enough and not quickly enough to replace everything. And during the temporary but harsh cutoff disruptions that will come when everything starts like severely falling apart, however brief those might be, those will play their part in like enormous temporary price spikes. But platinum and palladium are going to be going higher than they are right now and higher than they also otherwise should be, which for platinum would be around like 1200. Palladium should still be up closer to 2000. Uh, what the? Oh, that's zooming and unzooming. Okay. You're supposed to scroll down the page. There we go. So platinum's probably going to go spiking up over 2000 again at some point, up towards 3 maybe. Palladium probably break its previous record 2, up over 3, maybe towards 4. Rhodium, I can't give you that one. Rhodium's a lot more unpredictable. Do we have, let's see, what other happenings and events are coming? Oh, yeah. Back to the fertility rate issue. So I will be speaking about this when I make a video soon that will be titled something like things that would actually boost fertility rates or boost birth rates. Because the measures that various governments have been taking have been like, half baked and not really trying. And I honestly don't know how any of these people thought these things were going to work. Oh man, everybody. Somalia is like that's a really broad generalization because again, I have to see actual like individual data from fields once they start getting like well tested and mapped out and stuff. I'm using an assumption of sim based on the slope topography and also the similar geology being shared with Oman and Yemen. Kind of uh, yeah, Sudan does have a few. However, Sudan is kind of, I don't mean this literally, but they are kind of a dependent client state to Egypt. Not a vassal state because those are actually specific terms. People use them interchangeably. However, they do mean different things. Client state, and you can be both at the same time. Like Mexico is a client state of the US, as in its economic existence is wholly dependent upon the US economy to such an insane extent, to like effectively 80%, I believe. Canada is both a client state and a vassal state of the US. Canada is only 60% economically dependent on its interconnectedness with the US economy. But Canada, unlike Mexico, is also a vassal state. A client state is a state that is essentially dependent upon another state economically for its existence. A vassal state is a state that uh, accompanies a broader sovereign to whatever war or battlefield they are beckoned, which is why I said Mexico is a client state but not a vassal state. Canada is a client state and a vassal state. That's why you guys, Canadians, constantly show up with us to wherever we go when we go and conduct operations. Vassal states serve a function of adding additional force to whatever total force is deployed and also like absorbing some inevitable casualties so that the primary like sovereign operator of whatever this group is does not absorb everything itself. Sudan is effectively a client state of Egypt. It is not, however, a vassal state because the only thing the Sudanese military is capable of fighting is itself. So Egypt wouldn't really like call on Sudan anyways. The only instance that they would actually do that would be involving Ethiopia, just because Sudan is the one that actually shares a border with them. But even then, Egypt isn't interested in an actual conflict like a war of like trying to get Ethiopia to surrender to some terms or anything. The literal only thing Egypt would be doing is just bombing the dam and then flying home. Like that's literally it. It's just gonna be an airstrike, just a bombing run. Now, like I said, if Ethiopia does scramble what few not that impressive ancient fighter jets it has, then by all means the sortie that Egypt sends down there will engage those and shoot those down. And in the absence of the Ethiopian government having any air power anymore to bomb, food distribution camps within the various regions that are trying to uprise and break away, like Tigray and Afar and Amara, then those regions will jump on that opportunity when once Ethiopia is reduced to like nothing but a few ancient like Hatton tanks and dudes in jeeps with AKs. Where was I? Oh yeah, I was responding to a comment about the dam. Yeah, Sudan does have dams on the Nile. However, they are effectively like beholden to Egypt in a way. So Egypt knows that Sudan will basically just do whatever if they like tell them to do something. Ethiopia is its own thing and wants to go its own way. And Egypt is just not interested in taking the risk of them having that massive dam on that border. Right. Hold on. I lost my thought train of like where I was going before I looked at the comments. I lost my thought train of where I was going. What was next? Maybe I should look at the actual list in front of me. Oh yeah, the fertility rate stuff. I forgot. And everyone's attempts to reverse the declines being like absolutely horrendously pathetic. Check chat a little bit. Uh, Somalia allowed to operate nuclear power plants. The complete and absolute, like multi-year long, uh, proven complete absence of any terror or insurgency groups at all, and complete and absolute cessation of any form of infighting, and like a enough to where the outside world would be like wholly convinced that there is zero risk whatsoever. That is, Somalia is heading in that direction over time, but that is not something that I would count on being seen within like the next 20 years. Like I know most of the groups out there, like a decent portion of them have been wiped out now, but they are still there. They are still like managing to do a random suicide bombing here or there. It's just not not anything like it used to be. Like I remember back in say the mid 2010s, I remember like constantly seeing stuff, news from Somalia like 3 times in one week. Suicide bombing in Mogadishu market kills 175, and then like 2 days later, I'd see another one, and then 2 days after that, there was another one. Now it's down to like once every few months, I see one of those pop up, and like only like say 3 people get killed because the now like semi-unified Somali internal security force has managed to largely cut off Al Shabaab and the other militant groups from like weapons and explosive supplies. So now the bombs that like they're able to make are not really that impressive in size anymore. And also they're not really able to do stuff as frequently anymore. But it would require like a complete and utter clean sweep, guaranteed wipe of any and all form of risk. Uh, as I Okay, so I need to actually go through this, then I'll look at chat again. So the fertility rate stuff. Different measures have been tried to get people to actually have kids. People who have said they would have kids if circumstances were different. So different countries have tried different things. Putin, in his genius, has tried things like offering couples a grand whole $4,000 if they have kids. Uh, so that is, not a lot, especially given the fact that it's like a one-off, one-time handout. So that didn't really do anything. They tried a moderate mortgage discount so that homes for people with kids are like 25 or 30% cheaper. And that kind of worked a little bit, but it just didn't cut it. And also, that program has now stopped. As I told you guys in a stream a few weeks ago, because the various Russian banks have said that the government like subsidy money for that program has suddenly stopped being issued. Hint, hint, it's because Moscow is running out of money and is pulling money from everything else to keep throwing into their idiotic war. There are others, like Hungary, who have offered, cash handouts and have offered to have the woman, the mother, be exempt from income taxes for the rest of her life if and after she has a fourth child. Now, you can see how this is a cop out. Hopefully, use your brains. I'm hoping you guys are thinking along with me. Someone who is having four kids is going to be a stay-at-home mom. They are going to be a mother at home with the children. So offering her exemption from income tax is not an incentive because she's not really going to be working. So, that was kind of dumb. Orban is another one who thinks he's a genius and is not. Uh, there's others. There's been other incentives, like for China, they have not. They've stopped restricting the amount of children you're allowed to have. That's their incentive. South Korea and Japan are considering different areas and cities have done this locally. At a national level, they're considering offering uh, free daycare services to children for children under 3 or half off, like 50% discount daycare services. Uh, Sorry for the coughing. Like I said, I'm sick, but I can't afford to skip out and take time off or anything. So they're considering doing that. Might work a little bit, but it's not really going to have the effect they're looking for. So something you might see, I don't know if it will start for certain in these next 5 years, but it might, given how fast some countries are going down. Some countries, maybe one, maybe two, three, four, who knows, might start trying one of various actual result getting solutions that I will be talking about in that video. Solutions that we know work because we've seen them work before. They were not declining birth rate solutions at the time. They were more just like things we felt as morally obligated rewards to be given to returning veterans who had millions of returning soldiers who had returned from fighting in and enduring the most horrific, atrocity ridden event of human history that we now call the Second World War. Uh, Various participant countries, even the hyper capitalistic US, despite our stereotype, we also did this. Granted, on paper, it wasn't free, but basically it was free. To appease those who, even in light of those circumstances, still wanted to force them to pay, we still put it on paper that like they were paying for the homes, for the houses, but in reality, they really weren't. So we've done this in the past, multiple different countries. It wasn't to try to boost birth rates or anything. It was just something we felt obligated to do to the millions of men returning from what World War II was. It was essentially different countries did it different ways. In the U.S., it was basically like giving them a quote unquote 90% discount or something like that. And then also not making them have to pay any interest on the mortgage. And I think also it was something like you stopped having to pay any of it after like 10 years. So, because of especially whether apartments or houses, especially housing home cost in present day has gone so insanely out of proportion. Like, for example, the first home I lived in when I was a kid up until 12 years old on Cape Cod in Massachusetts, my parents bought that home in 1995 or 94 for 75,000. Now, and the home they bought in 2005 was 180,000, which, given inflation, should have been more around like 130, but whatever. Now, similar houses, despite inflation from the 75 starting point, inflation working out that they should be around like 190, maybe 200 at this point. Now you're seeing houses going for like 400, 500, in some like, completely damned places like California, regular people houses are like $1 million. And this is just the US. There's it's not, it's also everywhere else, like especially in the UK is having one of the hardest hits, and especially in London, which is where a big chunk of their population is. They're having the same issue in France and Germany. So, uh, because of how much of a chunk of insecurity that is, if you actually did the whole free homes thing for families or couples that are intending to have children and become families, I can like actually 120% guarantee you would significantly see the birth rate or fertility rate go back up. It wouldn't like go to some insane level, but it would substantially re-increase. And like I said, this isn't something unprecedented. We've done things like this before, just not for this reason. Now, this will face severe holdback if anybody suggests this, especially in the US, because it would, violate the sanctity of capitalism or something like that, is at least how like politicians would probably frame it when they oppose it. Just like how, not denying people life-saving healthcare when they're like going to die without it. The idea of still saving people's lives even though they can't pay for it is seen as like heresy because it violates the sanctity of capitalism. So it will probably be easier to pass off in like European countries, but even there, that's going to face some stiff resistance because people who already own and have been paying for homes or something will immediately jump into the "but I suffered, therefore you should suffer too" fallacy, which is a fallacy that has begun to stagnate civilization, coming from the parents of those of us who are currently in our either early 30s or in our 20s and below. Whereas, for most of time, we've wanted to, like, people have had the instinct of wanting to make the world, like, inherently better, which does include making it easier for their children's lives, not wanting their children to endure any kind of suffering that they endured. However, now attempts to, like, go further with that are actually being stopped by the older generations now, and they're doing so, and you hear them like argue this on their, YouTube podcasts or whatever. They're using the argument of we had to, like, go through this, so why shouldn't you have to? I don't know, because maybe it's supposed to be a parental instinct to, like, not want your kids to have to suffer something that you also suffered. That this is there's some weird, like, parent directed at child embitterment that is going on now. So that would be that would be where resistance would come from on Europe's part. In the US, the resistance to such an idea would just be because of the whole, capitalism is effectively the US government's real religion. But some countries in the next 5 years might actually start trying that. The whole basically giving families free homes thing. Doesn't have to be the best homes, the biggest homes, but if you remove the, you know, constantly having that kind of massive bill over your head, if you remove that insecurity, many people in current childbearing age who have been not having children, who have said they otherwise would, that is one of the, like, biggest things in, like, suggestions to where they've said, like, if that was actually, like, taken off the, expense concerns, then that would be enough of, like, a obstacle removal for them to then actually, like, go forward with wanting to start a family and have kids. So I think in the next 5 years, you might start seeing the first few countries legitimately trying something like that. Maybe not necessarily that exactly, but something of that, like, extreme measurement. Because this half baked, fake effort stuff, all these cop out measures that everyone's been trying, like, hey, can you have kids? Please have kids. Here, I'll give you $100. Isn't $100 so much money? I'm a politician and a billionaire. I don't know what poor people are like. $100 probably will take care of you for life, right? Here's $100. Please have kids. I need more slaves to keep fueling the economy. So some countries might actually start trying some more meaningful measures, especially as, more and more start plunging below the one child per woman line, as we, covered in the earlier part of the video. All right, let me take another sip of water, and then I'll look at chat in a second. We're getting pretty close to where I'm probably going to end it. We're over time, too. How over time are we? Oh, not that much. Only 12 minutes. I thought I would be way further than that. Ugh. Okay. Let's go a bit. A few things. Blah, blah, blah. I don't know. Different people, different cultures around the world respond to different things. And some groups get united and then want to break apart, like, later on. Like, for example, in Ethiopia, Somalia's neighbor, where, like, everyone was kind of okay for, like, a couple centuries, but then the Ethiopian government, over the last decade or so, decided, hey, oppression is fun. Let's start oppressing these minority ethnic groups up here in Tigray and Afar and Amara. Let's make our central Ethiopian identity group, like, the true dominant group, by trying to kill all these people and or drive them out and make their lives miserable. So, that's just a forewarning I'm giving, that you can suddenly flip into that at any point in time. Uh, So like Somalia, but Somalia's done good the last like 5 years though. For for some reason, I'm not certain where the motivation came from because after the disintegration in the late '80s and the Civil War started, it was tribe versus tribe for like 3 decades. However, like 5 years ago, when we hit like the end of the 2010s, I don't know where the motivation suddenly sprang from, but now everybody seems to like be done with that and wants to like actually come together. Like that is something that took me completely by surprise. I genuinely was not expecting that. That came out of nowhere like an RKO. So I can't I can't really advise on how that would be sufficiently maintained, other than decent enough oversight to make sure that no one starts getting like favored treatment over the other, as that's usually how stuff starts. Uh, blah, blah. What, to Egypt be allowed to bomb the dam? Uh, because that affects nothing. Okay, I'll go over this real quickly. Since the people misunderstand the what the actual modus operandi of the U.S. as a military political entity is. The U.S. does not instantaneously invade you or bomb you if you are anti-America. Otherwise, we would have actually done so to Nicaragua and Cuba a long time ago, or to Venezuela. Uh, what we do, or what like the military decision-making apparatus bases things on, is is what you're doing, or is what's going on disrupting the system? The system being the interconnected modern day like functionality of the world, the whole international trade routes, international communications, essentially freedom of travel and exchange of everything. If what you are doing is going to disrupt that in some way, like whether by disrupting oil supplies, whether by potentially like encroaching on, part of like the industrial bloc nations of the world, then we will take action against that. So, like, that's the reason why we responded to Iraq's invasion of Kuwait in the '90s and pushed Iraq back into Kuwait, because as a result of that, both Kuwait's and Iraq's oil production, crashed down close to zero. And that was, 6 million barrels per day that disappeared from the market at a time when, at the start of the '90s, global oil production was only about 60 million barrels per day. So, because of that action by Saddam, 10% of the world's oil supply, its predominant, transport energy supply, went out of the picture overnight. That got a fast and harsh rolling thunder response from us. In 2003, the reason we invaded Iraq was because we realized this was a pattern that wasn't going to stop. Saddam kept doing things like every decade. In the '80s, he decided to go to war with Iran. That crashed both his and Iran's oil production off and on. Then in the '90s, he invaded Kuwait, and that did what I just said. Through the later '90s and very early 2000s, he started doing death purges among the population because he was getting paranoid, and started gassing the Kurdish population. And so that started causing people to flee the country in huge numbers, a lot of whom were oil and gas engineers, which then caused Iraq's oil production to crash again. So that was a three strikes you're out reaction, because we realized, all right, this isn't going to stop. This is going to keep happening each decade, like on a schedule. He's going to keep doing something insane. Versus versus like others, like we didn't, really do anything in Syria when Assad was, massacring people by the hundreds of thousands because Syria doesn't affect anything. At its height, it produced close to 600,000 barrels per day, but it declined pretty quickly after that. And, now doesn't really have anything. So that was, something inconsequential. We took out Gaddafi when he started, gunning people down in the streets with attack helicopters because the people who like criticize the Libyan intervention kind of just ignore the part where like people were getting mowed down in the streets by the Gaddafi government because that would be inconvenient to the narrative to remember that part because that was then causing Libya to like descend into chaos rapidly, which was causing Libya's oil production to vanish from the face of the earth, and their production was actually decent. So that was why the Libya intervention happened. However, for like say the Sudan civil war, we haven't done anything in that because Sudan is effectively of zero consequence. Nothing comes out of Sudan, and Sudan doesn't really affect anything. Ethiopia, descending like that, if it descends into chaos as a result of Egypt bombing the dam, it would not really affect all that much. Ethiopian Airlines, which is a sizable African airline that like does a bunch of air travel destinations in Africa, that would get disrupted. But there's other airlines that go a lot of places, and that wouldn't be enough of a reason to warrant like actually doing anything or motivate us to like pull on Egypt's leash, so to speak. The reason we keep backing the now united Somali government is hopefully obvious because of the reality of decent enough like oil and now also as recently proven natural gas reserves, both offshore and onshore of Somalia, that are going to have their part to play in the coming decades in not allowing global oil production to decline too quickly. That's also the reason why, like, we left Afghanistan, but are not leaving the Middle East because that's still half of the world's energy supply. Both oil and gas comes out of the Persian Gulf. So no, we're never leaving the Persian Gulf, no matter what any president says or promises you. Uh, I hate to apologize. They lied to you. We're never leaving. We literally can't leave. That risk is too high. Because remember, this isn't just about us. This is the whole world. The rest of the world also exists and also uses and needs oil and gas. And we are just the largest, most dominant force and most like mobile and logistically capable force in terms of going and being everywhere at once. That it's just a lot easier to put this on us than to have some like split like rotating chairs of responsibility between like different countries every few years or so. Now, others like France and the UK jump in when we need like additional assistance with something, and we always drag Canada along as well. Australia always shows up on their own. We don't have to drag them because the Aussies just love a good fight. They've always been that way. But for like the Ethiopia thing, that wouldn't really do anything that would disrupt like the global system. So no, that's not something that our decision makers really care about all that much. which is also why, for example, we've we've intervened in the past in Niger, primarily to protect outgoing uranium supplies to the global market. However, we haven't done anything about, for example, the ongoing stuff in the Central African Republic or Cameroon because they're effectively inconsequential. But Niger, we were, along with France, constantly doing stuff in to ensure that those supplies kept going out. However, we foresaw the whole Niger turning against the outside thing eventually, and other uranium supplies have since been brought into the global feed. Like Kazakhstan has upped their production and they have quite a lot. Australia has all the uranium and their mine production has been increased decently as well. And we're about to start mining uranium here in the US again because we always did have uranium out here in the mountains and in the Southwest. It's just that ours was at a lower percentage concentration. So at the like lower $30 per pound prices that uranium was stuck at for like 2 decades, it wasn't economical to mine the uranium here. But now that uranium is starting to stay around $80 per pound, now these mines are starting up again. Ugh. Oh, wait, yeah, and I also forgot. Somalia is now also consequential because the sandstone underneath portions of the Somali desert has a decently high concentration of rare earth metals. That was discovered very recently in like 2019, I think. Okay. Uh, Now to keep scrolling down through chat, which is piling up on itself. Blah 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 blah. Uh, Millions of Sudanese have already been dying. The civil war has been going on for a year and a half now. Uh, we are uncertain of the number of people who have starved to death because food distribution has been completely disrupted and medicine distribution. But at minimum, right now, we think it's 250,000, so about 250,000. But in likelihood, it is probably higher than that. But, the Sudanese government is busy fighting itself, so no one's really counting exactly. But in terms of like people dying from flooding on the river from the dam getting blown up, uh, Egypt would notify Sudan ahead of time that it is going to do that. Like it, most likely it won't be concerned about Ethiopia knowing ahead of time, really, because Ethiopia's air force is, pathetic. So that there's no real risk from that. So Sudan or the Sudanese will have time to like get away from the river to avoid the water surge. But uh, you know, uh, plenty of them probably won't or won't go far enough. So yeah, there will be a death toll from that, but not it's not going to be like ridiculously insane. The ridiculously insane death toll is going to be ongoing into the second half of this decade from the famine and starvation and being deprived of medicine because there's no form of logistics or distribution in the country anymore because everything in the government's power is being devoted to fighting itself. Uh, see if you, yeah, I mean, Egypt might back them at face value. Egypt isn't like stacked with like mountains of things they could like of like weapons and stuff they could send to them. They do have a bit. I would also suspect Turkey would then try to play some of their part in that as well. But But that on Turkey's part, that would be more of a power flex than like actually having an interest in disrupting Ethiopia. On Egypt's case, you're right. The motivation behind that would be seeing like a disintegration of Ethiopia and it contracting to a smaller, weaker state. Okay, let's keep going down all the chat that I've ignored. Uh, no, I went over the oil production data regarding the second half of this decade in early parts of the stream. You can rewind it back or just watch the recording later on. Uh, Saudi Arabia will be holding around 9 for a while. They if they were still holding 10, they would begin declining around 2032 or 2033. However, holding 9, they can go a bit further. But given that they decided to start holding 9 earlier than they needed to, I suspect they'll probably drop down to 8.5 or 8 earlier than they would need to, probably in around the early 2030s or so. But we'll have to see. Regarding Canada, no, Canada is not going to be able to go up to 10. Canada, over the next 5 years, is going to get up into the upper fives. In terms of a maximum, if the Canadian government were not holding other places back, because the tar sands is the only thing they're really letting the industry go full throttle on. If they were not holding other areas back, then Canada would probably be capable of, over time, by like 2040, going up to 7 or 8 million barrels a day. But as things stand, likely going to go up to and end up plateauing off in, say, the upper fives or maybe six or so. All right, can I get through all of these? Blah blah blah. The amount of gold that is mined up in Somalia is not like consequential to be concerned about. Like the major gold suppliers that supply like significant percentages, like double digit percentages, or say like 8 or 9%, are China. Australia is the really big one. South Africa, the U.S., Canada, Brazil. Whoa! What are you doing? I apart from South Africa, I forgot who has the most coming out in Africa gold wise. I think it's Ghana, but I'm not entirely sure. There actually was a decent amount of gold in the ground in Somalia thousands of years ago, back in the times of the ancient kingdom of Punt. But a decent chunk of that was mined up back then. Uh, that's actually where most of ancient Egypt's gold ended up coming from. Was from the kingdom of Punt that existed at the same time, because there were other like civilizations around in Africa. Just everyone only ever like thinks of Egypt, but there were others like Nubia, which was ancient Sudan, was a whole thing. Uh, Aksum, I think, was Ethiopia's ancient name, and then there was Punt, which is what Puntland in Somalia is now named after. And oh, I forgot what there was an actual like sort of small kingdom or empire over here in the Sahara around Mali and Mauritania. I forgot what it was called, but yeah, Egypt's. If I remember correctly, it was primarily like their silk that they traded down south to get gold up from Punt and Aksum. Right, I'm gonna have to call this soon, but I'll keep trying to go, blah, 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 blah. Okay, of course, yeah, that was not that was the Somaliland that was the Somaliland's like autonomous government that made that deal on its own. I thought, not the like current Mogadishu government, but yeah, I chances are this is going to end up happening before Ethiopia like really does anything in this direction. And then that is going to make everything, like I said, kind of internally start to crumble. So I wouldn't be really that concerned with like the whole Ethiopia invading Somalia scenario. And then, okay, is that okay? I've made it to the bottom. All right. There were a few other things. Some there were like some tech things, I think. Oh, yeah. So a few things you will start seeing over the next 5 years that have been getting trial runs already, uh, especially since quite a number of companies are not really willing to pay living wages anymore, or at least to as many employees. They're going to be trying to save money by pushing now newly available forms of automation and trying to look like the good guys by increasing their wages, but having fewer employees so that they effectively keep their costs the same. So you will see uh, line rail robots is what I refer to them as. So like at the in particularly like kitchens and restaurants, we'll just use stereotypical McDonald's for example. So back in like restaurant kitchens and stuff, you're gonna start having like they'll be on like a set of rails above like the stations or above the fry thing, and they'll like uh, zip and roll like back and forth. Since it'll be really simple actions that they'll be taking, they're not going to be doing anything complex. Like just turn this actuator to scoop the fries, turn it again to dump them into the fry container, and turn it again to then like scoop the fry container into the bag. You're going to start you're going to eventually start seeing those over the next 5 years, like yourself at your own restaurants, unless you live like in the middle of nowhere, like in like Oklahoma or something. Your restaurants and other places are probably not going to see that for a while, but out in civilization, you're going to actually start seeing that soon. You're also going to start seeing the beginning of something I've talked about in the various like streams I've done in the past that are usually titled like the future you will actually see. You're going to start seeing a spreading of the disappearance of employees that are actually in a store to help you. The finding things stuff in a store is going to start getting switched gradually over to each store is going to put out their uh, find this in my store app, and you're going to have to rely on your phone and use their app, and it'll have like an AI map that will try to guide you to it. And if that doesn't work out, then they'll connect you to like an actual person at a call center who will like bring up a map on their screen and look at it. Also, a way that companies will start saving money that is not going to sit too well with the upper class is by, the AI stuff. They're actually, and I have legitimately not seen that many people point this one out yet. They're going to use the AI stuff to replace quite a number of, you know, white collar type jobs like accountants and uh, actuaries and people who run out like stockbroker forecasts. Since a lot of that is just doing math, which computers are already decent at. The only thing is, decent parts of that also involve converting human behaviors and likely market variables into some kind of mathematical formula that a machine can work with. So some companies are about to try saving money by cutting off, the top of the pyramid, cutting off the upper bracket of their employees that they have to pay like, $1 million a year as opposed to their minimum wage employees. Granted, they're going to be reducing those too by, switching over, starting to switch over to like automated line robots and stuff. But you're going to see in these next 5 years, the first few are going to start replacing like their accountants or their stockbrokers, their actuaries with, just AI algorithms. So that is going to come about. And especially like companies that are more aimed at the general population, like, stores like Walmart and stuff, or restaurants like McDonald's, they're the ones that are probably do that first. Cutting those high earning employees out will allow them for the way to raise like their lower employees' wages and keep their prices low, so that, like I said, they can pretend to be the good guy. They can in public relations try to keep playing the we love and care about our customers, we value our customers first act, because it's all a charade. Obviously they care about money, but uh, they're going to do that from both ends as a means of trying to maintain that. uh, I don't think there is anything else. That is actually it. And we ended up at 3 hours instead of two, just like I actually suspected. But so for anybody who missed like earlier parts, you can go back on the timeline here, or you can watch the whole thing from the start as the recording. That is going to be it for this one. So thank you everybody who showed up today for this lengthy, rambling side tangent stream. That is the next 5 years and various trends and events and things you're going to see. Thank you, obviously, to everyone who supports me on Patreon or via one-time PayPal stuff. And thanks especially to Josh, who does both of those and also constantly buys me like large amounts of Rittersport German chocolate, which is not cheap, which is, something I would be spending that money on anyways if he just gave me money instead. But thank you, everybody. I'm working on the end of year GDP numbers updates video that should be up hopefully tomorrow night, and might stream on Tuesday nights, New Year's Eve, not right up to the minute, like a few hours beforehand. So it'll be like maybe a chill plain Minesweeper geography quizzes, New Year's countdown stream from my European viewers' perspective, it'll be like close to midnight for you guys, but not for me. But that's going to be it for this one.